Okay, my name is Camilo Sánchez. I am an assistant professor of law here at the school and the co-director of the International and Comparative Center. And I am an instructor of the International Human Rights Law Clinic. My goal, or what I plan to do for this next 30 minutes is first to share what I think this is an exciting moment to learn international human rights law. And second, why UVA Law provides lots of opportunities to do so at the highest possible level. That's what I'm going to do this. I want to do that in the next 20, maybe 25 minutes. So let's get started. During the past decade or so, there's been a lot of criticism about democracy and human rights. So some people, and there's a lot of academic debate on this. So you'll find a lot of authors and books claiming, for example, that we've reached the twilight of the human rights regime or the end times of human rights. And there are many reasons for that, but to just use one of their arguments, to put it simple, they say human rights practice was great at naming and shaming. That idea that, you'll identify perpetrators, violators, and then you shame them. And that was great. But the problem is that we live now in a shameless world, right? So they don't care. They didn't even take pride for doing that, right? So we've reached a point in which human rights are not effective anymore. And for that matter, democracy as well. We're on the verge of something that is kind of a democratic retreat. So that's what we've been hearing for some time now. But then again, what I think is that reality has these funny ways to kick in and to show us that, this calls of the death of democracy, diplomacy, and multilateralism is not, at least it will not happen as soon as some people would think. And so, for example, two recent examples. First, I would say the pandemic is one of them. That idea that, each country or some countries on their own are going to face this and just be protected. Impossible. Out of the window, really easily. Like we have known now, for example, that there is no wall we can build and there is no border we can draw that will keep us safe. That safety would come if we cooperate and work together. And that, for example, a human rights approach to this, the human right to health is one of the best approaches, actually, if we want to deal with this in a global way and in a smart way. So that's one thing that, before this, we're thinking like our economic and social rights, I think of the present, and I think the pandemic has answered that call. And the second and very recent is the Russian invasion in Ukraine. I think that's also, and I think one of the many apparently miscalculations of Vladimir Putin is that he thought that the international community was going to be so slow, too bureaucratic to act. And what I think we've seen in the past 24 days is that those institutions that he thought are too fat and old to act have come together and have shown that when they're called, they can do something. So, for example, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, just held a hearing and requested Russia to stop using human rights arguments. Because in the realm of international law, there have been many arguments to be used to do that, and they use the Convention Against Genocide. So human rights arguments in order to do that. Same thing for the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Many countries and many people claim that that is a colonialist approach of justice and that states don't care about that at all. More than 40 countries call on the ICC and ask the prosecutor to start a case here. So that's another evidence of the importance of this. The European Court on Human Rights, using regional human rights law, also has granted precautionary measures in this case. The General Assembly, the coordinated action of more than 140 countries in the world with economic sanctions, for example, and even Terminator, they unleashed the Arnold yesterday. I don't know if you've seen the video. You know, when that guy entered politics, I thought that he's going to be such a jock, you know, and the joke is on me because he's a tremendous communicator, actually, not only for this, but for other stuff. But those, I would say those two examples to me show that there is a lot of ground still to be battled and that human rights and democracy are present, are called, that we need them. So, but I do not deny the criticism. I think they are important. They are on point in many realms. And more than anything, that if we want to have a human rights field that is impactful, we need to take this seriously. So I take the words of a dear colleague of mine, Cesar Rodriguez. He's at New York, at NYU. He says that we are in a time of transition. Maybe we are not in a crisis, but we are at least in a time of transition. And he says we have 5 existential challenges. And he makes the claim for human rights, but I think they're interesting to look at for challenges to democracy and multilateralism as well. So he says, like, we have first the geopolitical challenge, because human rights are a product of the World War II, and they were based on this Euro-American kind of political order that exists no more. Now it's why different, is more fragmented and unpredictable. So in the past, we could look at certain powers that would say they would align with human rights principles. So there's our allies, and we don't have that anymore. So we have to understand that geopolitical challenge first. Second, there is this socio-economic challenge. The rampant inequality, the extreme economic asymmetries associated with this rising income inequality that have created the world that we have today, and that have, to be honest, given rise to many of these populist leaders. They just feed on that, and they use that in order to campaign their platforms. And with that, the third challenge is that he calls it the democratic challenge, but to me it's more the authoritarian challenge on all of these populist leaders and discourses around the world. It's just not one thing of one region or the other. It is not a thing of the West or the East or the North of the South. It's just across the world. That idea that it is us versus them, that hits that very specific and important human rights principle, that is the equal dignity of all. That's what human rights stand for. And when you started dividing society or dividing the world between us and them, then you start to see the cracks. The fourth is the ecological or environmental challenge. The global climate crisis that is urgent, and that comes with lots and lots of human rights problems. And the last one, just not to take much time on this, is the technological challenge. The idea that now those tools and other technologies, such as artificial intelligence, that are collecting unprecedented amounts of data and personal information that can manipulate human behavior, disrupt elections, concentrate powers, all of that you already know, and all of these scandals about Facebook and others, you've been very aware of those. So those are 5 things that are very existential to the practice of human rights. So that's, and I think we're in a time of transition, and that's what excites me. And that's what I think it's very exciting to be studying international human rights law at this very particular moment. And I tell my students all the time, I think they're tired of listening to me about this, but I always tell them, I don't want to train you in the same way that I was trained. And I don't want you to mirror the human rights lawyer that I've been or that I've become. That's useless now. What I want is to inspire you to be the human rights lawyer that we will need in 10 years or in 20 years. What we want here at UVA Law is to help you be the human rights generation that is going to shape the field for the challenges that we have now and that we will have in 10, 20, 50 years. That's our idea. How do we do that? I'll say that we take a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, we give you specific instruction, theoretical, practical, and experiential instruction on international human rights law and international law. So, for example, we have different offerings here. As I mentioned, I teach the International Human Rights Law Clinic. And what we do there is that we take specific projects, real-life cases, in which we work with partners across the world, trying to push for reform, trying to provide human rights defenders an avenue to voice their claims internationally. So, for example, just a few weeks ago, with a group of partners, we won a case in Honduras, and we managed to get a group of environmental activists free after more than 3 years of pre-trial detention. Just for they stood up against a mining project, and they went sent to jail for 3 years. So that's the work that we do in those specific classes. So as I mentioned, we have international human rights law, in which we go about all of the institutions and norms, and you get to see the nitty-gritty of international human rights law. We have this experiential class, and we have another, I would say, very interesting, rewarding class, which is the Human Rights Study Project, in which we try to gather the lessons of activism and how to use those lessons for scholarship and how to write about human rights. And what we usually do is that we pick a topic and study that topic for a semester, and then we visit a country in which we can be exposed to that topic, and then students come back for another semester and they do independent research and write about human rights law or human rights practice. So that's the idea. So that's part A, specific instruction on international human rights law. But on top of that, and I think that's the best part of it, is that at this school we have a wide array of offerings that would help you understand, reflect, and act upon some of those 5 existential challenges. So outside my class, outside the clinic and international human rights law, you have, for example, if we talk about that geopolitical challenge, you have world-class faculty and centers doing work on that. So we have the National Security Law Center. We have people like Professor Christian Eikensaha, the director of that center, Paul Stefan, my dear colleague, Professor Paul Stefan. If you really want to know what is happening in Ukraine and Russia, this is the guy to go. He's an expert on that. He's devoted many, many years of his career studying that region of the world. We have Professor Ashley Dix. She's now in government, but once she comes back, she will be, have not only that her academic experience, but also that part of experience that is so important for teaching, and many others. So there you can add to what you will find in human rights law. Then, if we talk about the socio-economic challenge, we have people here that are studying the global economic system. So, for example, Professor Mito Gulati, who's an expert on the financial system and how, for example, some countries are in debt and how those financial commitments can affect human rights. So he has this, for example, been working on Haiti and how that initial debt that Haiti had, or that they were in debt to France because after they gained independence, so France said like, but you owe us. And for 200 years, they have been paying the do's and the democratic crisis and the human rights crisis is completely linked to that very existential threat to their democracy and their finances. We have Professor Pierre Verdier, who's been working on the banking systems and how that affects the global financial system and can have an effect on economic and social rights. We have people working on the international taxation system, which is one thing that is, I'd say, at the very forefront of all of the debates on economic and social rights right now. The idea that can we curb inequality by just asking the rich to pay their fair share, and how that would work? Because what many would say is like, you cannot do that at a national level, because if you do it here, what they will do is that they move their money to other countries, right? So that's a topic that you have to act together internationally. So we have here, for example, Professor Ruth Mason that has been working on that, or Andrew Hayashi that just came out with this brilliant paper on international financial sanctions and taxation. So merging the two different worlds there. So right there, regarding the authoritarian challenge, we have people like Mila Versteeg and David Law that have devoted their scholarship and their career to try to understand constitutions and what kind of institutional and constitutional arrangements can help uphold human rights law or human rights or democracy in different regions. Mila Versteeg across the world, as well as David Law, but he just came out with this book on Asia, specifically focusing on Asia. And same for the climate crisis challenge. We have PLACE. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's our program. And in law, communities, and the environment. And we have many faculty specifically working on that, on the environmental threats that we face. And for the technological challenge, we have the Law Tech Center led by the rock star that is Danielle Citron, in terms of privacy rights, in terms of digital rights, as well as my colleague, Professor Aiken Saha, an expert on cybersecurity. So that is what I think UVA Law is a really good place to study international human rights law. Because you not only get that part of, look, this is the nitty gritty, this is the specific of this, but that we give you the opportunity to look at the big picture and to see how we are doing that. Are we being effective on that? Can we just keep writing reports, naming and shaming? Do we need to do something different? Anything at all? And with all of those other classes, and with to being exposed to all of that knowledge, that's how you can account the international rights law part of the instruction. So this is why I'm so excited to be here. That's why I enjoy my work so much. And that is why I'm inviting you today to join us, to be part of this community. So that's all I had. So I'm going to take questions if you have.